Welcome to the Monday, February 8th, 2016 meeting of the City of Evanston Planning and Development Committee. We have a quorum, so we will begin. I first would like to ask for approval of the regular minutes of January 25th, 2016.
Move approval. Second.
Any comments, corrections? Otherwise, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Items for consideration. We have only one tonight. That is Ordinance 16016, Plan Development 831 Emerson Street. The Plan Commission and staff recommend adoption of Ordinance 16016 for approval of the plan development with rezoning from C1 Commercial and R5 General Residential to C1A Commercial Mixed Use and Special Use for a convenience store. The 12-story 260-unit residential building with 44 bedrooms would include 3,300 square feet of ground floor commercial space and 145 parking spaces on site. Staff recommends additional requirements for this development, which include increasing the affordable housing fee in lieu of contribution and other traffic and streetscape improvements. This is for introduction.
Move introduction.
Alderman Fisk.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Tendem. I am moving to hold this in committee until our next regularly scheduled meeting.
Is there a second?
I'm going to second because I was told by Alderman Fisk that the developers would like to have another community meeting. And so based upon that, I would second it, provided that the people who come out tonight to speak would be allowed to also go ahead and speak. I think that would be for the residents, because I'd not like to inconvenience them.
I'm not sure that's appropriate.
Well, we cannot hold it and then have them speak. So if we'd like to have citizen comment.
I think we should have the citizen comments first, and then.
So if there's no one else seconding, if you're not seconding,
Well, then I will hold I won't second then, because I want the residents to be able to speak.
Okay.
And we just did the same thing in AP&W. We held 3 items on the advanced disposal, and we heard citizens speak, and then we held it.
It was a little different.
Well,
we have a motion. Is there a second? Not yet. So we will have citizen comment. 10 people have signed up.
Wait. Would you clarify the motion to hold this over?
There was a motion made by Alderman Fisk to hold it, and there was no second.
Just try and be polite tonight, okay? We're all going to be civilized here. Ms. Mason Cup, does a motion to hold over in committee require a second?
Good evening, Michelle Mason Cup, Deputy City Attorney. Yes, it requires a second.
Okay, Alderman Nguyen.
Well, I would just like to make sure that if Alderman Fisk does not receive her second right now, her motion does not fail for want of a second. So perhaps we should get clarification on that from Ms. Mason Cup.
In order to hold it to the next committee meeting, the motion needs a second.
Or if we wanted to hear from the community, then Alderman Fisk could withdraw her motion until after the community spoke, and
That's
then she
correct.
could renew it.
I think the community is prepared to speak at the next meeting. And I think.
I don't think so.
We have 10 people signed up to speak. I think that speaks otherwise. We can certainly.
Okay, Mr. Chair, then I'm withdrawing my motion for the moment.
Thank you. Alderman Rainey.
Mr. Chair, did we ask some questions? May we ask some questions? I have a couple of clarifications here.
Prior to citizen comment, or?
Well, the motion's been made to introduce and
Right.
seconded, so
All
it's
right,
now
right, okay,
time for us to talk.
right.
I would like to be reminded of how, and I know I should have looked this up, but how is the affordable housing fee determined?
You mean
Is it based on square footage of the living space or number of units? How do we determine it?
it's a percentage of the units?
Percentage
Of
of the
the
units?
total, I'm sorry, Mark Munzer, Director of Community Development. It's the percentage of the total units.
So.
It
if-
depends on if it's in a TOD area or not, but
Okay. Well, let's just say it's this building, okay?
Mhm.
So if there are something over 200 units, and there are about 300 and some odd square feet, right? And so you're saying that even the $1 million is not enough, is that right?
I'm sorry, Alderman Rainey.
No, I want the answer. Go ahead.
Under the approved ordinance that went into effect on January 1st, which this project is not tied to because they filed prior to that date, but under the new ordinance, it would be 10%. So it'd be 2.6 million. It'd be, I'm sorry, 100,000 per unit. 10% of the units would be 26 units, so
But
2.6
they're
million.
not under that.
Correct. So our direction was that we try to meet the intent of the ordinance. At 500,000, it would be 19% of the approved ordinance, and at 1 million, which is the staff recommendation, it would be at 38%.
All right, well, here's an interesting problem with that. Let's just use even numbers. 200 units. And these are units that are 300, an average of 350 square feet, I think, when you add them all up and average them, something like that. Did I read that? So let's say this was a luxury building with 3,000 square feet units. The fancy luxury building would be paying far less than the cramped 350 square feet building, because it would be based on units, right?
Correct, but that's the approved ordinance.
Well, we need to take a look at that. And I think this raises just such an amazing question, because the multimillionaires will be living in the big fancy units, paying less for affordable housing than the poor students who are jammed into 200 units in this building. So I think we need to immediately take off the table the whole issue of an additional 500,000 at this time. So I just wanted to clarify that, because that's how I thought it was based, on the number of units. So the more units you have, the more you pay, but you could have very tiny, all studios, as a matter of fact. But then if you had large deluxe units, you would pay less. Okay, that sure doesn't make any sense.
Okay.
Thank you. We should refer that then to our staff for the Housing and Homelessness Commission. Thank you. Any other one? Council would like to speak to
I
this?
just wanted to get, that's been bothering me.
Yeah, no, great. Like I said, we have 10 speakers for citizen comment. Our tradition here is to hold the comment to 3 minutes, which is a lot longer than you actually might realize. And while people are speaking, please be respectful of their time. The first 3 people are Liz Pildes? Lisa Pildes, I'm sorry, Regina Henry, and Liz Luby. So I'm really sorry if you would repeat your name when you come up, so I'm not entering something wrong into the record.
Lisa Pildes. I live at 2327 Park Place. We're owners of several properties in the 1st and the 5th wards. We lived in the Fireman's Park neighborhood of the 5th ward for 36 years and raised our 3 kids there, and last year as empty nesters, we moved to the 6th ward. I have several issues with 831 Emerson, the property at the northwest corner of Emerson and Sherman. The first is the extension of downtown north of Emerson's, its traditional boundary. We in the Fireman's Park neighborhood were recently surprised that without any consultation with residents, property owners, or apparently at least one alderman, the city would like to gobble up our entire neighborhood and parts of the 1st, 2nd, and 7th wards for a TIF. It variously calls this area downtown, although it extends north of Emerson all the way to Colfax, or Maple Foster, although it extends all the way from Ridge to Sherman. You may ask why I'm bringing up the TIF at a meeting about 831 Emerson. Well, their property at Emerson and Sherman is smack dab in the middle of this proposed TIF area, and the January 20th memo to the Economic Development Committee treats 831 Emerson as a fait accompli. Residents are concerned that 831 is only the beginning and represents a slippery slope which breaks the traditional downtown northern boundary and gives special exceptions to a private developer for zoning rules, living space ratios, parking spaces, etc. If the city thinks it's time to have a big think about the area bounded by Grove, Sherman, Colfax, and Ridge, then it should not be rezoning land willy-nilly just because some developer is asking. When is a TIF needed? When property is not desirable enough on its own merits to attract private developers. See what I'm saying? Either this is valuable property in downtown Evanston, which ought to be marketed as such rather than giving it up as a private dorm space, or it's TIF eligible, in which case it should be part of a larger discussion about what the city variously calls downtown or Maple Foster. The developers are correct when they call 831 a unique housing option in Evanston, because it would be Evanston's first private dorm. The developers may try to pretty it up with talk about it also being for young professionals, but let's face it, young professionals have been there and done that. The last thing they want after graduation is to live in a dorm-sized room in a building filled with college students. The city has not allowed any new university building west of Sheridan Road to preserve the residential character of the neighborhood. I don't believe that Northwestern would get approval if it were applying to build a high-rise dorm at Emerson and Sherman, and not just because of the lost tax revenue. Yet the city has recommended that 831 be approved.
You have about 30 seconds, please.
What happens if the present company decides it does not want the building anymore? It said in one of its earlier presentations I was at that it only owns, I think, about 60% of the buildings it's built. Who'd want this building filled with micro units and a dearth of parking spaces? It can only be a private dorm. Well, Northwestern might like it, of course. The property taxes and affordable housing contribution might look tempting now, but what if NENU buys it and takes it off the tax rolls? What if a prime piece of downtown, as you would say, real estate is taken off the tax rolls forever? Haven't we learned our lesson? Please do not approve 831 Emerson. Evanston can do better. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Henry?
Hello.
Hello.
My first comment was an agreement. Evanston can do much better. We don't mind there being a development at 831 Emerson. We don't want this type of development. A perfect example was like there's going to be a senior assisted place out by Ridge. If we had that across the street from us, that would be great, because those people would be able to get to the downtown shops, they could do business there, they could get to the transportation. It would fit. With this dorm, those students are not going to be using transportation. They're going to be walking back and forth from the campus. So this TOD is a joke. Also, we do not like the fact that the number of people that are going to live there. 446 people across the street from me, I think, is a lot of people. I have been woken up in the middle of the night, but the thing is there are going to be bicycles, there's going to be cars, there's going to be pedestrians. Emerson is a very busy traffic street. There are problems. We have ambulances and fire trucks coming to Symphony all the time. They use that alley, they use the street. Finally, one person said something about there are other tall buildings on Emerson, so this fits in. If you look at the tall buildings we have, there are 2 HUD buildings and a Northwestern dorm. These are buildings that were built in the 1970s. They've been there for years. They're special use buildings, so they should not count towards the community. So if you walk down Emerson and look, you'll be lucky if you see a 3 or a 4-story building on north of Emerson. It just doesn't fit. We like the fact that there are homes. People trees, all of that stuff. This is just too much for this area. And finally, Northwestern said they do not need this, they don't want this. So why doesn't a different developer or the same developer come up with a plan that people could go along with? So I also ask you to vote against this. This is the worst thing in the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Liz Luby, is it?
Good evening, and thank you for your time.
Did I pronounce your name correctly?
Yes, Liz Luby, and I live at 721 Foster Street. I've lived in Evanston for 48 years. I want to reiterate what the two women just said before me, and I just have a couple of bullet points. A dorm. This is a whole new concept of a private dorm, and I understand this builder is building ones on campuses at Madison and Champaign, two very different sites than Evanston. They're building them in the area around those two campuses. This isn't a Northwestern type of thing. I did get a statement from, and I handed it to you folks, that the head of residential housing at Northwestern said that they have a 10-year plan for building residences on campus. They have nothing to do with this. They have no statement to make about it because they have nothing to do with it. And I sent that all to you, Alderman, 2 months ago. My objections, number one, a dorm. Think about it. It's a SRO is in our mind. 3 unknown people living together. Can't even imagine how you work that out. The purpose is lousy. Traffic problems, very serious. Just go down Emerson during the traffic zone times and realize now you're going to add how many bikes, how many kids on skateboards, and they will be on skateboards or there are other ridiculous forms of transportation that's so dangerous in the middle of that busy street. Some have cars, and there's supposed to be some issue about where the cars are going to be parked in the Maple Street garage. Does the theater know that the city rents these things out to things other than, that's a big question mark in my mind. I want to be able to park my car in that lot because I pay the taxes when I go to the theater. And who are these students who are renting this dorm? The adaptability of the building. If the concept doesn't work, if they can't rent their beds out, what happens to that building? It's not going to be a very adaptable floor plan to maybe turn it into 2 apartments per floor. It'd probably take a lot of constructions, and who's going to do that? Who's going to oversee the residents? There was some talk of a person on each floor overseeing is there an age limit? Or they have to be 21 to live in that building, or 18? Who's going to manage the building like resident dorm people do on college campuses? There's no precedent in Evanston for a building like this. I don't think this is the one that should begin it. And the other thing that I have to comment on, my first plan commission was this fall. I was so disappointed in their reaction to our objections to this place. What is the purpose of the Plan Commission? And one of the they were going on about their standards of approval. One of the items was of a regard for the neighborhood. Well, they didn't listen to any of us.
About 30 seconds remaining.
Okay, and so I just think there's just so many questions marks about it, but mostly it's not going to be a desirable thing for this part of Evanston, for all the grand planning that's ahead. So thanks for your time.
Thank you. Next 3 speakers are Barbara Pearson, Judith Siegel, I believe, and Ken Davis.
Hi, I'm Barbara Pearson. I live at 1864 Sherman Gardens. I would like to say, how about if we stop saying it's a dorm full of students, but say it's going to be basically transient housing? What does that do for the stability of the Evanston neighborhood? There is going to be a complete changeover year after year, bed by bed. Is that be conducive to actually stabilizing Evanston, which already appears to be that way? It's a good family place. It's good young professionals, good single people. So I don't get it. Anyway, transient rather than student. Let's see. Student housing isn't needed. They want us to think it is. but it's not. Northwestern's not interested. They're going to be covering it on their own property. Why are we doing it? And I hear people come up here time after time and ask questions, but nobody ever volunteers an answer. It's like there's no answers other than money. It's always money. Big money and the little guy, once again. That's it.
Thank you. Ms. Siegel?
Hi, my name is Judith Siegel, and I live at 800 Elgin, and so we're located very close to this new development, about a block and a half away. And basically, I agree with everything that the other speakers have already said, and I don't want to repeat those things. I think those are all valid objections to this building. I want to bring up a slightly different issue in opposition to the building. And we have recently relocated to Evanston. We looked at the zoning code for Evanston prior to the purchase of our condominium, and we believed that it would provide for future development consistent with the lifestyle we wanted to enjoy here. We understand that the new building is going to require several variants. The proposed new building, if it happened, would require several variances from the existing zoning code. And I just want to raise the issue that I think it would be desirable for Evanston to have a long-term plan for future development that people could count on, where there wouldn't continually be variances from the zoning code, and where citizens would know what the rules were and be protected by those rules. So, thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Ken Davis? I'm sorry, man.
Well, I'm obviously going to go against the grain a little bit here. I believe something needs to be done with the property, that's for sure. I'm not sold on the concept, but I do think if it's something is done, the focus people ought to be given consideration. I live at 807 Davis. They built a beautiful property for us, and I do think that it'd be beneficial to do something with that property. Whether it's this or not, I couldn't comment on it. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you. The last four speakers, Ron Ipchian. Please correct me.
That was very good. My name is Ron Ipchian. 831 Emerson has been owned by my family for 90 years. After serving in the U.S. Army during World War I, my grandfather, Jack Ipchian, opened up Perfecto Cleaners, which started at 1738 Sherman. In 1926, my grandfather purchased the parcels of property which make up 815 to 831 Emerson and moved his business to that location. Perfecto Cleaners remained a family business till 2004. I grew up at 819 Emerson, which was a home which was right there. It's no longer there now. I'm a proud product of the Evanston School District and a graduate of ETHS in 1969. Perfecto Corners, LLC, which owns 831, is owned by my two aunts and my mother, Carol Ipchian, and she is the managing director. My mom lives at 2315 Orrington. My mom's maiden name is Swanson, and her family dates back to the early settlers here in Evanston. My great-great-great-grandmother, Susan Pratt, was the first child born in Evanston. My mother grew up at 2107 Maple, which is a home which was built by my great-grandfather John Swanson in 1886. My grandma Swanson's father, George Stiles, was a fireman in Evanston, and along with another gentleman were killed in a fire in 1905. My great-grandfather and two other firemen are mentioned at the monument dedicated to the fallen firefighters at Fireman Park on the corner of Maple and Simpson. As you can see, my family has a long and proud history in the city of Evanston. Upon my father's passing in 2012 and my uncle's passing the next year, we started the process of selling the property. We met with several developers, and we listened to many different ideas for the property. After consultation and due diligence with our broker, Jim Nash, we settled on the concept brought to us by Focus. We chose to work with Focus because of their wonderful reputation and like several of their most recent projects. It also was comforting to know that the president of Focus, along with two of their executives, live in Evanston, so they have a fond appreciation of the city. In closing, my family has owned and conducted business in Evanston for almost a century. 1831 Emerson to the Ipchen family has a wonderful history, but it is time for this property to be put to better use. Focus Acquisition has stated all the benefits for the city that this project will provide, and we, the Ipchen family, look forward to the council's support, and thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Next speaker is Michael Sayre.
Hi, my name is Mike Sayre. I live at 2327 Park Place. My wife is Lisa, so I'll leave out the personal history. A couple of points I wanted to make. First of all, there is a sense in which any private dorm like this or any dormitory would be a focus of criticism based on the whole issue that comes up with respect to students. And I don't think students are the problem here. I don't think students are the enemy. But I do wonder about the proposed usage of this space. It is a private dormitory that Northwestern hasn't said is necessary. You'll recall that right down the street, the E2 building was recently built. They built it with an idea that they were going to market it to young professionals who were going to go downtown on the train. And they came back to the city after a while and said, oh, by the way, that didn't work. So now we want to reconfigure the apartments in that building so we can rent to students. And already there have been some issues with, some of the issues there. But, and what is true is, and if you were here for the presentation by the E2 manager, they don't have much control over the student behavior. So while the vast majority of students are responsible and good kids and don't cause problems, some will cause problems. Now, if that happens in a Northwestern dorm, Northwestern has control over it. But if it doesn't happen, if it happens at a private property, a private landlord has much less ability to control those kinds of problems when they crop up. Northwestern has said that they didn't believe they would ever be allowed to build west of Sheridan Road any more than they already have, whether it would be dormitories or other buildings. And so the question arises, so that they couldn't build this building. They don't think they can build a building at 831 Emerson that would be a dormitory for their students. So why is it that a private developer who will have less control over what actually occurs there should be allowed to build a dormitory that could be a problem if it's not successful, and even if it is successful, they have much less control over problems that if they arise out of the building. One of the oddest things about this is the tax incentive financing proposal that came out that was then
You
pulled
have
back.
about 30 seconds.
Yeah, and the question is this 831 was described as one of the reasons we need a TIF in the area of, that this is included in, and the reason for that was, well, there won't be so many students living there, and it was like, well, we need now a TIF to get some development going.
I'm sorry. The mayor has asked if we could recess this meeting at this time. We could, that's an option to recess or to conclude. I think we need to conclude, but she was up here saying, 5 minutes.
One more
so.
sentence, I'm
Thank you.
gone.
But we have 2 more speakers too. So.
Which is, well, I lost my train of thought. You don't need a TIF. You end up building something that requires you to require a TIF for development is to normal people incomprehensible.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I know we don't really speak from the dais during these citizen comments, but I think it should be stated very clearly that there is no TIF in any neighborhood that is not already established on our agenda. None, nada, none. So let's not Listen to me, I'm an alderman, I get all that information.
Okay.
We don't have a tip.
We know the two choices before us, to recess or to call this meeting to a conclusion.
I think we have an
Okay.
extremely important
Okay.
agenda tonight. I don't think we should just leave.
Okay, we
Mr.
will
Chair?
recess then.
Yes, yeah.
Testing, all right. Can everyone hear? My apologies for breaking into the meeting, but we testing, it is on. All right. We are very lucky to have here tonight Ray Knox, who played in the Negro Leagues from 1949 to 1952 for the Chicago American Giants. Ray Knox was born in 1932 in Macomb, Mississippi, the seventh child of 8 children. His family quickly migrated to the north and was one of the first black families in the town of Wheaton. Ray began to show extraordinary talent and promise with baseball and was offered a chance to play for one of the many Negro semi-pro teams at 14. Don't tell our kids to start. Becoming one of the youngest players ever. He then began to travel with Chicago American Giants, exclusively barnstorming through the Midwest, South, and Appalachian Valley, accompanied by his older brother as his chaperone. Well, that's good you had a chaperone. I'm feeling better. He played against or knew Ernie Banks, Minnie Minoso, and Hank Aaron, and says that he knew that Jackie was the right man for the job. Ray not only persevered through the segregated 1950s, but he also managed to raise 6 children after his wife died while giving birth to their last child in 1963. He has lived in Evanston for the past 40 years. We just found out about this. He also worked in Evanston as a manager at Ken's Cleaners at Dempster and Elmwood for 35 years until he retired. He now travels around the country to major league parks, festivals, and memorabilia shows promoting baseball, signing autographs, and sharing stories from his illustrious past in the Negro Leagues. His legacy is now secure at the Negro League Baseball Museum in Kansas City, Missouri, and I am honored and delighted to present to you the key to the city of Evanston. And he knows how to make a meeting move along because he's not going to make a speech.
On behalf of Ray Knox family, I met him about 5 years ago at church, at Reba Place Church, and someone said, "You've got to meet this guy. He's got a story." So we sat down and we talked a little bit, and I was elated. Just city, and I took him around to the Levy Center and to as many elementary schools as we could get in, and I wanted children to see his legacy and see who he was, not only as a baseball player, but as a man, and how well he took care of himself. He can still do push-ups. This guy's, at one point he had 18-inch arms. I'll have to show you a picture of that. About 30 years ago, they're roughly about 14 inches right now, but he still works out very rigorously. But just a fine person, and I'm very proud to know him, and I wanted the city to know his story and also celebrate him and give him his flowers while you can smell them. How about that? Let's give it up. Let's get up for Madam Mayor. For Madam Mayor, we have a signed autograph ball for her, and for each alderman each alderperson. We thank you for the work that you do. We have a signed autograph card from Ray from his rookie card. Thank you. And thank you, Alderman Rainey. I CC her in on the on a copy to Alderman Brian Miller, who made this all happen, got it to the mayor. Thank you so much, 8th and 9th Ward Alderman.
Thank you for letting me interrupt your meeting. Sorry.
Make him come down.
I'm going to ask if he needed to finish his thought. All right. We will unrecess this meeting. I'm not sure if that's a formal entry, but it's it. We have two more speakers on our list, Jerome Seaman and Don Colley. I believe that's correct.
You're famous. You're so famous. I know.
Thank you, Alderman Tendam. I'm Jerry Seaman, Jerome Seaman. I live at 1856 Sherman Avenue. I really want to talk about this as a very speculative development at 831 Emerson Street. You're going to put the convenience store basically on the side by the alley. The way the ordinance says, it's supposed to face, the windows are supposed to face Emerson, but the entrance is not on Emerson, it's on the alley. And in terms of my knowledge of city planning, which says keep the eyes on the street, you have the eyes on the street, but you don't necessarily have it on the doorway. And that's a very, very bad place to put something that you want to be public and open to people. Right now, the 7-Eleven is behind a parking lot, but you can clearly see everything that's going on in the store from the street. And there aren't many eyes on the street, since the Sherman Gardens apartments tend to face their gardens and not the street. I also want to point out that, you know, the whole thing is based upon a lot of money, $1 million here, $1 million in real estate taxes, and there seems to be a bias in favor of a development that grossly exceeds the standards even established by the ordinance for this particular zoning. And plus, the fact that this is a very speculative development. You don't know, somebody pointed out about the E2 development not developing out the way people planned it. This is a very dense plan in a very congested place right alongside the CTA railroad tracks. And there is 18 restricted parking places within a block of the place. You're reducing the parking from 400 feet, 400 parking places to 145 or something in that neighborhood. And you're also requiring them to rent spaces at the 1800 Maple Street. Now, that's only 3/10 of a mile or a 6-minute walk. But, you know, it does get cold. I walked over here from 1856, and I'm 73 years old, and it's a difficult walk, particularly going north and west. It'll be a little more comfortable going south and east. But I wanted to point out those difficulties. I also wonder whether or not it's legal to restrict the parking restricting residents from having parking privileges on the street at all. That seems to reduce the people who live in this apartment, these transients, to second-class citizens who are going to live in these small apartments, whether they're Northwestern students or whatever. So there's a lot of issues about this thing that do not really meet what I consider to be good city planning.
Thank you. Our last speaker is Don Colley.
Hello. I second a lot of the comments that were raised, and I'm very grateful that we have a forum like this where we can ask the commission, the mayor, planning commissioner, what's happening. They provide us with information. We can talk to developers. I'm very happy about that we have this process. But there's a hole in the process, and that hole is language. And throughout these meetings that I've attended, I've heard what seemed to me to be very disingenuous use of language. That these were being described as luxury, but they are these cramped spaces, well, 330 square feet, with a Murphy bed. That there was a fanciful term thrown around by one of the planning committee members describing Emerson as a boulevard. And there's sweeping away, thus it's a boulevard, why can't development go north of that? Sweeping away the fact that cities have very clearly defined zones and ordinances and codes. And there was the use of the term family. Now, the height restriction was popped primarily that there would be an allowance of, was allowed to be popped because it would include family. And this term, is there a legal definition of a family? So would there really be a family that could use a 3-bedroom pre-furnished apartment with the possibility of a shortage of parking? If they come in at a certain time, they may all be taken, for which they would have, and they would be surrounded by a dormitory, for which they would have the privilege of paying $36,000 to $40,000 a year with no equity. Can we please give me the demographic of a family that would fit that description? There was use of terms contextual were thrown around, that it would use masonry, yet the buildings are outsized with the surrounding buildings. E2 is a great example of how contextually it doesn't really fit in with the opposite side of the street. And it is that language and that understanding of what the codes and the ordinances represent that needs to be very transparent and not shifting all the time, because that is the understanding that the citizens have with governance. And at this point in time, it seems to me that those cards are now face down, that we don't really know what the ordinance and zonings will mean, because we can come in with terms and all of a sudden describe a street that in the Chicagoland area would by no means be a boulevard. This is a very clearly defined thing, and Chicago was one of the cities that created this plan that most of the city based on. So that is what I have the most trouble with, is clarity of the language that seems to be shifting underneath us during this debate. Thank you.
Thank you. That does conclude our citizen comment. Alderman Fisk.
Yes, thank you. I am now moving to hold this in committee.
And I would second.
Is there any, there's no discussion.
Can I ask why? Can we just find out why? And is your reason for doing this now to cut off any discussion among the other aldermen?
I'm holding it now at the request of the developer who would like to have a neighborhood meeting. They didn't request the holdover. They requested the neighborhood meeting.
Okay,
And
I
don't-
wasn't aware that they had requested that, because I talked to them and I thought they told me no, and I don't always have difficulty with yes and no. But they said, no, they didn't ask for neighbor. But if they did, fine.
I think the request was made quite a while ago, and they did not get a response that they had
Can
intended.
we have the developer, do you want to?
Okay.
I
Is
mean,
it-
I don't-
all right.
I don't get it.
The motion is held, the item is held, and we have any communications or other discussion?
Well, I want to make sure that we're going to deal with this in total at our next meeting.
I don't know the date certain, but
Well,
it will be,
it's February 22nd. It has to be on
it will be
February
continued.
22nd.
Yeah, Alderman Rainey.
Rollover is for 1 meter.
That's correct. It cannot be held a second time.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Munzer.
No, I was just going to address that it would be placed on the agenda for February 22nd at Planning and Development, but there's no other communications.
Thank you. With that, I would like to entertain a motion to adjourn. Second?